everybody, I'm Richard Holdner and welcome to the channel. So, full disclosure, while I wanted this to be a 69 Pontiac Ram Air 400 versus a 1970 LT-1 350, this video is not actually that. Or maybe it might be. What I'm going to show you is what effect displacement has. We're going to compare a Pontiac 400 to a Chevy 350. I'm also going to throw in a Chevy 302 versus a Chevy 350, which gives us nearly 50 cubic inches. But we'll see what happens when we compare the 350 to the 400, the 302 to the 350. And in the case of the 302 and the 350, it actually is reproductions of the original DZ302 and a reproduction of the original 1970 LT-1. On the Pontiac side, we've got a 400-inch Pontiac. It has the factory crank, the factory block, the factory rods, the factory pistons there. It's 10 1/4 to 1. It has a set of 6.2 heads on it. It has the factory cast iron quadrajet intake manifold, an HDI distributor, a factory quadrajet. We ran it with headers the same way that we ran the 350. The thing that I don't know is it a Ram Air 3 cam or a Ram Air 4 cam? Who knows? Cool results nonetheless. Let's check it out. Hey guys, if you're new, welcome to the channel. But what happens if you have a question? Hey, I saw this video, but I wanted to ask Richard a question. Well, you're in luck. You get to do that. Join us nightly, 7 o'clock Pacific Standard Time on the live feed. You can come on, join the group. If I don't have an answer to your question, chances are there are lots of bright guys. They might have an answer. So if you've got a question about any of the video that you just saw, or maybe you're working on a project, join us live, 7 o'clock Pacific Standard Time on this channel. Don't worry, we're going to get to the Pontiac versus Chevy, or 350 Chevy versus 400 Pontiac, but first we're going to take a look at what 50 cubic inches does with some Chevy on Chevy action. In this case, it is a DZ302 versus 1969 versus a 1970 LT1, when SCCA finally lifted the ban and said, okay, you don't have to produce these motors in this displacement. You can actually just de-stroke the other motors that we use for production and then run them in Trans Am. So when they allowed that, Chevrolet went up and upped the displacement on the little 302 to 350 cubic inches. It had Fuelie heads and the 780 carburetor, dual plane intake manifold. Although they did step down in camshaft, they went down 10 or 12 degrees on the intake duration, changed the lobe separational angle a little bit, going to the LT1. So not only was it bigger, but it actually had a slightly milder camshaft. So, but we can take a look at this, and they're both 11 to 1. They're both small block Chevys. Real similar equipment, minor change in the camshaft, but we'll see, and you guys can let me know in the comments, what do you think? Did the camshaft do a bunch of this, or was it mostly displacement? You guys let me know. Actually, for me, I think it's a combination, but let me know what you guys think. This is our DZ302. It was run with a 750 Holley, a mechanical secondary Holley, and long tube headers, no accessories, which would have been the way that this thing was probably rated back on the dyno. I don't think that they may have run it with stock exhaust manifolds, but it wouldn't have made anywhere near this much power. But the interesting thing is, this was rated at 290 by Chevrolet, yet it makes like over 350. The LT-1 that we're going to take a look at was actually rated at 370 horsepower in the Corvette and 360 in the Camaro. Probably marketing, so the Corvette guys felt like they were getting more power. The reality is they got the same motor, a little bit different exhaust manifolds, but really it would have done the same thing. But run in the way that we run it on the engine dyno, meaning it was fairly cold. It had an electric water pump on it, had long tube headers, had an optimized tune. We adjusted the air fuel and the timing. We even adjusted the lash a little bit on this motor. But our little DZ302 produced 357 horsepower. Peak torque checked in at 333 foot-pounds of torque. Note that the little DZ302 was making peak power all the way out at 6,700 RPM, ran all the way out to 7,000. Here's what happened when we put the 350-inch motor in this, and you can see we actually made about the same peak power. The LT-1 was 353 horsepower, so 3 or 4 horsepower. I think you're going to have that kind of variation between one example of one motor and another example of the same motor. But so they made very, very comparable, even though they're rated differently, very, very comparable peak power numbers. But what I want you to take a look at, and what we're really looking at here, is we had about 48 more cubic inches comparing the 302 to the 350. That translated into a dramatic change in torque production. You can see down here at 4,000 RPM, the 302 was making 325 foot-pounds, where the 350 was making 391 foot-pounds. So we had a dramatic change in torque production. In fact, we had much better power with the 350 all the way up to 57 or 5800 RPM. So that would give you an indication on drivability and really acceleration too, because unless you had a lot of gearing in a DZ302, it was going to be no match for the bigger engine motors or the bigger engine vehicles, because it just had so much more average power production. In fact, the biggest gain that we saw was in the order of 80 or 90 foot-pounds between the two. And you would definitely feel that, assuming that you had enough traction to put that power down. Now let's take a look and see what the difference is when we go from a 350 Chevy, our LT-1, up to a 400-inch Pontiac. And before I go, what do you think? Is the 400 Pontiac actually a small block? Let me know in the comments. So before we compare the Chevrolet 350 LT-1 to this Pontiac 400, which is a 69, I think, let's take a look. I want to show you real quick why you should always upgrade from a 2-barrel to a 4-barrel. And we did an interesting test on the 400, and so we'll take this time to illustrate that. This is with our Quadrajet, factory Quadrajet induction system. We'll get into what the motor is. But this is the 2-barrel down here. So equipped with a 2-barrel, it made 255 horsepower. But equipped with the 4-barrel induction system, it made 343 horsepower. As you can see, torque was way up also, from 375 foot-pounds to 412 foot-pounds. So the moral of the story, if you're going to do a 400 or even a 350 Pontiac, or really any of these motors, a 4-barrel, definitely the way to go. So now let's take a look. We can talk about our Pontiac 400. And this Pontiac 400, while I wish I knew for certain that this was actually either a Ram Air 3 or a Ram Air 4, it was a 400-inch Pontiac. This had a stock block, it had stock heads, and the heads were 6.2 castings. This thing had flat top pistons with valve reliefs. It had the cast iron 4-barrel Quadrajet induction system and the factory 800 CFM Quadrajet. We ran it with long tube headers just like the Chevrolet. The one thing that I don't know, and the owner wasn't certain about it, is they didn't know whether it was a Ram Air 3 camshaft or a Ram Air 4 camshaft. Judging by the peak power number, but I've not run a lot of Pontiacs, I'm suspecting it's probably the Ram Air 3 cam. But let me know in the comments. Let me know what you guys think for the Pontiac guys out there. Let me know what you think that this combination might be. But we ran this thing basically in stock trim. We did optimize the air fuel with metering rods and jetting on the Quadrajet. And then also with timing on the distributor, we had to adjust the HEI. We had to take away some of the total advance, and that way we could get the optimum combination of initial and centrifugal advance. And we ran this thing and just adjusted the timing and air fuel until we got the power we got, and it produced 343 horsepower at 52 to 5300. Peak torque checked in at 412 foot-pounds with the 400. Once again, let me know if you think the Pontiac 400 qualifies as a small block, or are you like the Pontiac guys where none of the Pontiacs are small blocks and none of them are big blocks. There's just one kind of block, although there's the other one, the 455, the 421, and the 428 that has the different main bearing size. But here's our comparison for the 350. So I'm going to go ahead and bring myself down here so we'll get out of the way. And I'm going to go ahead and label these. What you can see is the smaller, bigger cam 350 actually made a little bit more peak power. It made 352 versus 342 for the 400. But look again what the 400 did from 4,700 on down, just like the 350 versus the 302. The bigger motor made a lot more torque. You can see down here at 3,200 RPM, we've got 363 for the 350 versus 395 for the 400. So where the 350 made less than 400 foot-pounds, the 400 made a good bit over 400 foot-pounds. So again, in that range, and this is one of the reasons that the 400 I think was very popular, especially with the bigger Ram Air 4 camshaft, is that unlike a 350 or certainly a 302, the 400 had enough displacement to swallow that kind of camshaft and still offer reasonable drivability. Now, the reason you guys should be noting that, hey, this made it less of a difference in terms of the torque production going from 350 to 400 than it did going from 302 to 350. And part of the reason for that, obviously, is that we changed camshaft, going from a bigger cam to a smaller cam on the bigger motor. So we would have seen more there. But we're also, I think, running into areas where, look, we don't have a lot of cylinder head on this motor, so we don't have a bunch of extra flow capacity for these combinations, even though that would be less important down at the lower engine speeds. But I think we're getting to the point where this is kind of where these things are going to be. Let me know in the comments what you guys think. But as we go up in displacement, we didn't pick up more peak power, although I think we would with even camshaft. And also, the Pontiac is more like 10.25 to 1, whereas the LT-1, the 350, is 11 to 1. So we've got some things going on here that are not just displacement. But I thought it was an interesting comparison: Pontiac 400 versus Chevy 350 versus Chevy 302. Let's get to our conclusion. Okay, guys, what do we learn in this comparison between a Pontiac 400 and the smaller Chevy 350, and then the Chevy 350 versus the smaller Chevy 302? What effect does added displacement have? And obviously, it's nothing but good. What we see is a ton more low-speed power. In fact, we see a ton more mid-range power. We saw more power all the way up to 4,500 to 5,500 RPM, depending on which one we're comparing. And so we see a lot more drivability and a lot more power, which is why when you compare a DZ302 to an LT-1 350, the LT-1 350 with the slightly smaller camshaft and more displacement is a much better car to drive around. It feels much more sporting and much more powerful. It's much more responsive. You have to really keep the small motor wound out, but as we saw, it made really good power on the big end. The same thing happens with the Pontiac 400 versus the Chevy 350, which is why Pontiac 400s earned a lot of respect back in the day. That's because even equipped with a Ram Air 4 camshaft, they had the extra displacement to help tame the camshaft down, have lots of low-speed power, and then utilize whatever airflow they had from those cylinder heads. Armature holder, please make sure to like, share, subscribe, ring the bell, do all that stuff. I'm going to try to build some real Pontiac motors, but I'll keep testing.